Well, hello and welcome everyone to this pretty exciting privacy webinar. Myself and Chris are going to go take you through for the next 30 minutes or so. So, just as an introduction, my name is Nick Dennis. I'm the RVP of Solutions Consulting here for Telium across APJ. Telium's, I don't know, a brand trusted by global organizations to help collect, enrich, protect, and activate valuable first-party customer data in real time and help fuel AI projects with that first party customer data and help activate that into your customer experience. So many thanks for joining us today. We're going to be exploring the OAIC's recent updates about pixel guidance and third party trackers on site. And we're going to discuss some strategies that's going to be important for every business leader and anyone that touches any aspect of that digital ecosystem. So in today's conversation, myself and Chris, mainly Chris, let's be fair, are going to unpack the new guidance and what it means for your business, how you as a brand can take charge, avoid common pitfalls, and walk away hopefully with some actionable insights and strategies to help protect your organization. What I find particularly interesting about these recent updates, and I'm sure many of you have read them and read blogs about them, is that Carly Kind, the Australian Privacy Commissioner, has really gone deep into the weeds of third-party pixels and online trackers here. It's really interesting, actually, to almost a technical level. And it really opens up a whole world of detail and nuance about data collection that is actually rarely covered and can be quite opaque. So I think it's really interesting space. We have an expert in privacy with us who really understands that kind of depth and the technicalities here as well. And so as part of that conversation, we'll be talking about how capability like tag management and customer data platforms can also play a supporting role in helping you deliver that kind of governance to your organization. So I'm delighted, as I said, to be joined by Chris Brinkworth, Managing Director of Civic Data. Chris, over to you. Why don't you give an intro and tell everyone how you got into this exciting space?
Oh, I look at how I prepped for this. I've chosen to give a different explanation, to be honest, Nick. Uh, Given also that we've just, as everyone saw last week, had the amendments made to the Privacy Act that's not been changed since 1988. I thought it'd be a different way of explaining things. So my background very simply is treat me like a reformed tobacco industry executive, where I know that over the years I've put billions of consumers in credit card debt based on targeting, profiling, and tracking using digital marketing. I've dropped billions of cookies. I have generally learned everything there is around how to locate, attract, and retain customers using digital technologies. So the background is I was a media buyer, media director, planning and buying digital campaigns, but then I was heavily involved in the tag management sector over in the US as well. And I got to meet a lot of the founders of these tools that everyone uses now on a day-to-day basis. And this industry has evolved so much that I saw, having children now as well myself, um, I just saw how far it's gone. And there was very much a need where there has to be a bridge for marketers who are using these technologies to understand how to explain to the privacy teams that need to be across this now, especially with the legal changes that have happened in Australia, exactly what's going on, what's being collected, the notice that's being given, the transparency, and so on. And that need is very clear from both the privacy leaders and the legal leaders side as much as it is the marketers side. So Civic Data, in a nutshell, saw that this would become a problem 3 years ago, which it has. And candidly, we've not found any standard marketing services agency that have done what we've done, where we've been involved in the review of the Privacy Act. We've made submissions to the review of the Privacy Act. We're referencing the Attorney General's report on the review of the Privacy Act because we truly put work into understanding Australian privacy principles and what those mean now and in the future. So, in a nutshell, anything about where privacy impacts marketing technology, that's all we focus on.
Yeah. Excellent. And at the moment, I imagine you're a very busy chap because the the topic of conversation has all been privacy. Now, obviously, last week we had the updates around social media access for under 16. So there's going to be some very interesting conversations across Australia about all of that. But we are focused first and foremost here around those OAIC updates and guidance, really. That we heard. So, look, when I speak to prospects and potential customers of Telium, the normal conversation when it comes to privacy is around consent management, consent capture, and really honouring that consent. Now, the recent updates, this guidance from the OAIC, is really more focused on digital tracking and what third-party third-party pixels are actually doing on your site. Now, what data they're collecting, where they're sending it, is it right to collect that data? So it covers a number of things. Do you want to summarize those OAIC guidelines and updates and just maybe talk about some of the business impacts there?
So I think the first thing to note is, given when we invited people to this webinar, we weren't expecting that last week unexpectedly we'd have this update to the privacy and other legislation amendments, which has now happened. So I was going to talk about generally what the OIC are doing with these guides or this guidance is they're putting together everything that was already available across different resources across the OAIC. And anyone who's truly studied the Australian privacy principles as they stand since 1988 would understand that we work in Australia on the basis of notice rather than consent. So it's quite often a surprise to people when you discuss that you need to talk about the notice that you're given. Well, you're giving a customer about when you're collecting that information, how it's going to be used, and is it reasonably going to be used in a certain way for purposes that you're being very clear about. But there's a bunch of stuff where, different to other countries, we don't have to worry so much about the consent aspect. So there's always been some kind of grey areas that people don't quite understand about those areas. Now, the guidance that the OAIC came out with was very much based on existing Australian privacy principles on the old legislation that changed last week. And really, the key thing for people to take away, and I do suggest, and Nick, I'm going to put together like a section on our website, which is /Telium for you. I think that'll be our first section for Telium we've ever had, because I know that we're very agnostic and we don't partner with anyone specifically. But what I'll do is I'll put all these documents in there so people can easily locate them. But this idea of these changes in the advisory we would put forward in September from September, when we were giving guidance on what this new law that passed last week would happen, the most important takeaway is it used to be that based on the guidelines the OAIC gave, they would have to go through a court process before they could start to give you any type of fine or penalty. But one of the core outtakes that went live in this new legislation is they have new powers that mean they don't actually have to go through the court system anymore to then send an infringement notice to anyone that is having certain administrative errors in regards to what they're collecting and what they're doing with these tags and pixels versus what they're saying in their privacy policy, what they're saying in their notice, and so on. So what I'm saying here is you need to really carefully study what you're doing with all of these different technologies, how they align with Australian privacy principles from all of the different Australian privacy principles. So an example would be from a secondary use aspect. So if you're collecting data within your digital customer experience layer using these tools, are you then pushing that data into machine learning or AI projects, and you haven't got the correct consent or given the correct notice in regards to the secondary use of that data? If the OAIC were to be told about or to look at your website and see that you're doing that, and it's not covered clearly in your notice and privacy policy and so on, then they will be able to issue an infringement notice that you will now have to contest in court or pay. as opposed to the OAIC previously having to go through the court process first for it to impact you. So it is a major, major step change. And I think of everything out of today's call as we go through this, I would definitely look at those new infringement notices that went live last week in line with the guidance from the OAIC.
Yeah, exactly. You really want to be proactive on this and not react, to
Well,
inbound. So yes.
and I think that's where, we've been trying to advise you probably, some people get a bit annoyed with the amount of content we've been pumping out around this stuff. So we gave our own very detailed document called Pixels Privacy and Precautions document, a primer for privacy and legal professionals. There's a lot of P's in there, but that was May this year because the awareness is very much needed. Actually, I'll put that into the /Tedium folder as well, because if privacy professionals don't understand this and legal professionals don't understand the extent at which the data can be collected by these tools, it just can't be covered within the wording that you need to do. So I'll just give you one very basic example that a lot of people don't realize is generally any type of pixel that you're using can and does collect rich metadata, user agent, operating system, screen size, all that kind of stuff, which is very useful. But it also collects everything on the page, such as the URL structure or the query parameter. So a very stark example is where if you as a business or your pricing team or your general counsel don't believe you're collecting any sensitive information as it's pertains to the Australian privacy principles, such as religion or health, as an example, if someone is on a page that, let's say it's www.tediumclient.com.au / and this is an extreme example, but HIV antiviral / generic brand name for that product, that is very, very sensitive information that you need to make sure is covered at an administrative level, and you're being very clear about that. And that's the kind of extent where we've noticed businesses don't realize just what data can be collected by these tools. And it's only now a lot of our clients who did understand that have got on top of it through our audits. But since last week, we've been swamped with people suddenly realizing, okay, we need to get on top of this because there is now this infringement aspect.
Yeah, really interesting. Yes, I think that just kind of opens up that whole kind of world of things going on your site that you're probably not aware of and you don't expect to be happening, but they could well be. So understanding what is happening is probably that kind of baseline that you need.
I do want to kind of like the other part of that is anyone who's on this call that is an engineer per se or is like has high fidelity within your platform, or any type of platform, they understand that a lot of these tools can be triggered in certain ways, such as mouse hover over, or a delay of some form, or a set of certain criteria that you're putting from the data layer. Now, that in itself is a really good example of why you can't just do a basic scan of a website thinking that's going to cover you. Because a good analogy I like to use here is there's that aspect, but there's also what I call the fossil layers of technology, where you've had marketing leaders come in over the past 15 years, put new technologies on websites or within apps that they're still sitting there from 10, 15 years ago, alive and collecting data, and no one actually knows they're there, and they're not covered within your notice and your privacy policy and so on. So there is such high fidelity to understand on this that you must have a very solid framework to understand what is running now, how's it being triggered, where is data being sent, what is that data, and how are we going to cover that in all of our notice, privacy policy, disclosure, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. It really can be a Pandora's box of third-party pixels and tags and trackers there. And as you said, understand what's being captured, what's being sent, is it going overseas? Do I need all that data? Do I have that kind of concept of data minimalization I need to focus on?
It's a great point. Like I don't want to disrupt because I'm looking at the time that we've got, but it does make me think, because just so everyone on the call understands, we prepared based on the OAIC guidelines, not the new laws that came in. But I do want to throw this in, that there's now, as part of the new legislation, there is a new whitelist that's been provided around countries that are okay to share data with. So the question is, are these tools that you're using coming from any locations that are not on that whitelist per se? How are you going to cover that kind of data transfer aspect of it as well?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, very good. And I think, part of that safe list or white list is also working with your legal and privacy teams to understand, what are the vendors that you do want to give access to that data, and what is the purpose of it. In some recent articles I was reading, like the average number of trackers per site is about 43 on average. But if you go to sites, one of my favorite sports, I won't say what it is, global website, you go on there, there's about 280 trackers on that site that you can go and switch on, toggle on or off. I mean, that's just crazy. If you've got that many trackers, pixels on your site, just managing that from a privacy policy, from a legal privacy perspective, I mean, that's a job in itself, just to do that. So I think the extent of this data leakage could potentially be massive for many organizations.
It is, but it's also it means it's ripe for snake oil sales as well, where I believe a lot of companies will start to say, "Don't worry, we can handle this for you." But unless you truly understand what tools are within or without these systems that think they can handle it for you, you really can't ever be on top of it. So and again, I don't want to dwell on this too much, but you can't just rely on a scan from a system to say this is how to solve it, or someone saying we've got an incredible consent/preference tool in our platform that can solve this. To truly manage this, you either need to have every single one of these tools running within the one platform, such as yours, as an example, which is physically impossible, as you know. You cannot run some headless e-commerce system through Telium, as far as I'm aware so far.
Yep.
You can't do that. So you need to find and understand tools that integrate with all of these other systems, and have examples of how to do that as well. And I've actually seen a couple of examples the past kind of year of companies out there saying they can solve this, but when you look under the hood, it's you don't want to go down the wrong process and not look at this properly.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we have talked a lot there about kind of that pixel challenge. Is there anything else in that OAIC guidance that we want to kind of just discuss briefly?
I think if I was to look at the use and disclosure stuff and think a little bit more around that, because there's different variations of clients of yours or prospects on the call that would be marketers versus publishers, who would use things in a different way. Now, I talked about the secondary purpose of data earlier on about let's say if you're using that information to pass into machine learning. The governance and understanding of, okay, I'm collecting this data and it's being pumped into a data lake, or streamed somewhere valuable. But if that is now going into machine learning, these models themselves, as you're probably aware, they create data permanence. So that data is pretty much embedded into a model, and can't escape unless you have a way to understand where it is and how to delete it, but pretty much you can't. So a lot of people on the call might start to realize while watching this now, they should stop watching and go check what they're doing with that data at the moment from a machine learning perspective, because if you have been collecting information and using it in a way that you haven't been very clear about in your notice, or you haven't got consent for, and as I mentioned, some of it may be religious or sensitive information such as health, that's one example. But then the other example would be, am I creating derivative products to allow me to target people in other ways that I didn't actually agree to across the internet? Is it reasonable the way I'm using this data? Have I fed this information, such as an email address, somewhere that I wasn't clear about, or it wasn't reasonable for me to send this to, such as keying together a hem pair, such as a hash email and a hash mobile number, to target people in a way that they haven't been given notice on about how that's being used, or if needed, the consent related to that as well. All of this falls under that aspect of there are now new powers from the OAIC based on the new legislation, which if you read through the guidance from the OAIC across APP3, APP6, APP5, you really need to do, they suggest a priority impact assessment, which is the correct term for it, on every single piece of technology. We call it an audit, right? So when we do these audits, it's a very, although some businesses don't like the term audit, they look at a review, as it were. But it is very much something you need to be doing in tandem with your legal and your privacy teams. No matter how horrible it seems that you've got to kind of, lift up the sheets to show how dirty the laundry is, it is something that if you don't do it, it's going to come back and bite you.
Yeah, I think there's a really good example for anyone listening of a privacy incident assessment form that you can download from OAIC website and just read through that, review that, and understand the kind of steps to identify what you need to go through. It's quite an interesting document and quite an eye-opener.
For every technology you're using, because I think we're going to get to that point where you can't really say in your terms and everything, hey, we send this to people such as, and we use it for purposes such as. It's just not going to stick in the future. So you've got to be very clear. You can't be vague. You've got to be transparent about what you're doing. Otherwise, you will end up a target for any type of action that's available, especially if you're a high-profile business.
Yeah, can't afford not to act. Okay, so moving into that kind of, what are the immediate actions that we think, or you think that businesses in Australia should really be kind of starting to do now that this legislation is passing through, and we've seen this guidance? Any recommendations for immediate action?
Well, find out the name of your privacy leader. Point number one. And this goes both ways. I was at the International Association of Privacy Professionals annual summit last week. And I will say what was great to see were, I've been going for 3 years now running, but this year there were a couple of the larger marketing service agencies had attendees there. So this is garnering interest, which is really great to see. But generally when I'm at a conference, and I did this at your event down in Melbourne recently as well, when I was on stage, I said, put your hands up if you use customer data for targeting in any way, but keep your hand up if you can tell me the name of your privacy leader. And most people took their hand down. But the same is true there. If you were to say to every privacy leader there, put your hand up if you know the name of the person putting the tags on websites, same problem. So I think one of the things that the most important thing to do is pull together a cohort internally immediately. We've seen it to be so effective in our sessions is going through these changes in law and these guidelines with the head of data, the head of marketing, the CIO, the head of procurement, the general counsel, and if you have one, the head of privacy, get everyone in a room and start to discuss what are very important projects and investments for you as a marketer right now. If you stop doing them, how's that going to impact the business? How's that going to impact strategy and so on? Because the last thing you want are the privacy team to come knocking in 5 or 6 weeks' time saying, stop, stop, stop. And they just cut your legs out from underneath you. So that I think would be point priority number one. Then once you've done that, you put in place a plan to run that privacy impact assessment across every single technology, and then how that maps back across the documentation that you're providing to people. And do you know what? Honestly, there is such an incredible marketing outcome benefit to this that people don't realize. The fact that you start to realize there are tools that are slowing down your website, there are tools that are no longer being used. You start to realize which of these technologies no longer work from a cookie deprecation perspective. There's just so much benefit in having this roadmap of technologies. The outcome that you achieve is not just compliance and avoiding these new penalties and infringement notices, but there are real deliverable marketing outcomes from doing this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also helping to build customer trust as well by showing you're on the front foot, by doing the right things and not waiting for something to go wrong and then act. So I think you can also differentiate against your competitors as well, because not everyone is going to be on the front foot. Not everyone is going to care until there's some kind of penalty, and then they'll act.
I'll tell you one thing you shouldn't be doing is asking ChatGPT. It does concern me recently that I'm seeing a few articles out there where it's very clearly someone's asked ChatGPT for something, and it is the answers that I'm seeing are grossly inadequate and can put companies at severe risk as well. So again, I cannot stress enough, you need specialist advice on this. Absolutely need to find companies that understand the Australian pricing principles inside out. If you don't have an internal pricing leader, then you need to find an external. And I want to be very clear, while we're experts in where pricing impacts marketing, media, and measurement at a technical level, there are very, very, very solid agencies out there who focus on the entire pricing reform that you should be speaking to, because you need true pricing leaders to understand this. And again, you can't just rely on that basic scan of tags and so on as well.
Mhm. Yeah, no, good advice. And I think from a technology layer, because technology can help support scale these things and put processes into place and make them live across the customer experience. The typical technologies I think of that can help in this space is probably a tag manager. So tag managers have been around for some time and just seen as a commonplace tool. But actually, some of them, such as Telium's, can provide better permissions, better regulation and governance around privacy policies, access to tags that you can actually put on your website, that single place where you can identify actually what is running on my website today and what shouldn't be there. Think about that collection of data and then usage of data through consent management. So there's CMPs out there, OneTrust and Udemy, Telium can capture consent, but then it's the orchestration of consent. It's one thing to capture consent, but then how do you stop those tags and pixels actually firing on your site and capturing that data in the first place, and managing, where that data is being sent to, and letting individuals, change their opt-ins and consent over time. So tag management, CDP, CMPs, and then things like data warehouses or storage to actually log all of those consent signals that have been captured over time. So when I think about what sort of setup might you want to think about, and obviously not every organization is going to do all of that, those are kind of 3 or 4 kind of key technologies. Am I missing anything? Anything that you've come across that can also help?
No, I think it comes back to what I said earlier on around it's like the old DMP world when it was such a crazy market. Everyone's selling DMPs. It was very confusing to understand what to buy, and a lot of people were disappointed in their kind of end choice and so on.
Yeah.
The same is true with understanding the governance around consent and preferences and so on. So you truly need to understand the differences between a consent management platform
Mhm.
versus a cookie banner versus the fact that these tags are collecting information that is sensitive, that have nothing to do with a cookie, and a cookie banner cannot solve for that. The orchestration that you just mentioned there is such a fascinating area, that what happens if someone's on a different device, a different user agent? How do you manage that particular consent if they're arriving and they've not signed in? There's all sorts of areas there that you need to understand. So look, this is not a project you can suddenly just go, right, I'm going to implement this particular platform and it's done within a week. These are long, focused projects that you need to solve for through similar processes such as an RFP or an investigation, to truly understand if it solves all use cases. And I will tell you the biggest thing that we've come across over the last 3 years about our clients that we've worked with is quite often there's already a project internally by the legal team where they're working on what they believe is consent management, but it's just preference center within a marketing cloud of some form. And the gaps there, when you start to show them, they go a little bit ashen
Yeah.
on kind of what's being missed. So this is definitely something that needs guidance. It needs true thought around kind of how you researching it, implementing it, and understanding how these different technologies work.
Mm. But Chris, I think that is a great place to end this chat today. We've covered a lot of ground here around technologies, around pixel third-party tracking, around building these kind of data councils to really understand how you're going to leverage and use data sensibly within an organization. So I've learned loads today. I'm sure the audience have got loads of insights from you. And if anyone listening or watching would like to connect with Chris or myself, our details will be shared with Bright Talk. And yeah, happy to take this conversation a bit further with you. So many thanks, Chris, for joining us today.
No, it's great. So, very important subject.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Bye.